Our stories are the fabric of our history.
Some of my family arrived on the Mayflower.
My grandmother was from Ireland, and my grandfather was from Italy.
My grandma came from Mexico.
I was the firstborn child of Japanese parents.
They came to America for the hope of a better life. On July 4th, 2026, America will celebrate its 250th birthday. And America 250, the organizing commission, wants to hear from you. Share your family's story of the American dream and be part of history, our history. In 2026, America will celebrate its 250th birthday. And America 250, the organizing commission, wants Americans to share their hope for the country.
My hope for this country
is for us to be a more equitable place to live,
where people can be who they are no matter what that is,
and to share love
No matter their race.
And fight to make America a place everyone is proud to call home.
Now it's your turn. Share your hope for America.
Restaurants are celebrations, they're hubs. It's about coming together, nourishing ourselves, our bodies, and our relationships with each other. We don't exist without the people that walk in our doors every day. We feed each other.
Boston never gets old.
From our very first fight for freedom, America's story is a story of selfless sacrifice.
I have ancestors who fought alongside George Washington.
My father landed on the beach in Normandy on D-Day.
I was a soldier during the Cold War stationed in Germany.
my brother served in Iraq.
On July 4th, 2026, America will celebrate its 250th birthday. And America 250, the organizing commission, wants to hear from you. Share your story of service and be a part of history. Our history.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Faneuil Hall. Thank you for joining us. The presentation will begin momentarily. Please take a moment and place all bags, coats, and personal belongings under your seat to make all accessible space available. Thank you for your cooperation.
After 247 years, you could say, I've seen some things. Building a democracy from scratch, it isn't easy. Or being home to hundreds of millions from everywhere on Earth. Fact is, there have been challenges since the very beginning. Uphill battles, setbacks, and injustices. But you know, Americans, we got grit. We fight for what we need. And what's right. What we want for the next generation. We take care of each other when it gets rough. We inspire each other. Innovate together. Get the job done. And create so much opportunity. Heck, that's probably why folks have been inspired to come here for so long. And now, we've got a pretty big anniversary coming up. The big 250. So, in honor of that, we're launching America's Invitation. A chance to share your thoughts on our past, the heroes you love, and your dreams for the road ahead. Because your dreams will be our future. Your story is the American story.
Boston, a city upon a hill, a city of history and innovation, a city of culture, art, and tradition, a city of champions, legends, and revolutionaries, a diverse city of courage, compassion, and strength. Around every corner, there are echoes of the past, from the cobblestone streets to the historic buildings, standing the test of time, reminding us of where we've been and where we still need to go. History happens here. This history is complicated and complex. Telling the stories of our past informs our present and guides us all to a better future. In 1773, scores of colonists boarded 3 ships and risked everything to defy a tyrannical government. A moment that went far beyond tea and taxation. A moment defined by one's right to protest, representation in one's own government, being treated fairly, and about ordinary citizens doing extraordinary things. The Boston Tea Party. A moment that sent America down the road to revolution. In 2023, Boston has commemorated the 250th anniversary of this iconic moment that forever changed the course of American history. Through a year of public engagement, dynamic programming, exhibits, special events, installations, and performances where audiences have explored the many layers of Boston's Tea Party story. The Year of Commemorations has featured unprecedented levels of collaboration between organizations across Boston and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, including museums, schools, historical organizations, as well as Boston's arts, tourism, and hospitality industries. This commemorative year will culminate in the grand-scale reenactment of the Boston Tea Party on the 250th anniversary, December 16th, 2023. This world-class public event will take place at the very locations where the Boston Tea Party occurred 2.5 centuries before. History happens here and will happen here again. Be part of that history and commemorate Boston's Tea Party legacy as an inspiration to generations of people around the world. Be history. Be here. Be Boston. Good afternoon, and welcome to Faneuil Hall on this very special 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. Today's presentation, Faneuil Hall and the Boston Tea Party, a protest in principle, is about to begin. Please take your seats. Today's presentations would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors and partners. We would like to highlight and thank our presenting sponsor, Meet Boston, as well as our other leading sponsors, Massport, America 250, Historic Tours of America, and the Intercontinental Boston. Please give these sponsors a round of applause. We would also like to acknowledge these key partners in this 250th commemorative year: Revolution 250, Revolutionary Spaces, the East India Company of London, and Delta Airlines. To you and all the sponsors and partners, thank you. At this time, we ask that you please turn off or silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Video recording and the taking of flash photography during this presentation is prohibited. Please take a moment to locate the nearest exit. In the unlikely event of an emergency, please use the exit you used to enter this hall, and safely make your way down the stairs and away from the building. Thank you for your cooperation. And now, the commencement of the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. Please welcome to the stage, City of Boston's Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, Shagun Idowu.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Happy Tea Party Day. Y'all don't sound enthusiastic. I'm gonna say, Happy Tea Party Day. All right, there we go. Well, welcome everyone here to Faneuil Hall. My name again is Shagun Idowu, and I have the very distinct privilege of being able to serve as the Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion for the City of Boston. On behalf of Mayor Michelle Wu and the thousands of Bostonians who power our city, the Board of Advisors for Boston Tea Party 250, and all of the sponsors of today's events, I welcome you to this afternoon's presentation, Faneuil Hall and the Boston Tea Party, a protest in principle, a retrospective on revolution. This is one of several events happening today in commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, one of the most iconic and impactful protests and acts of civil disobedience, not only in our American story, but in the story of people across the globe. Before we begin, I'm pleased to share with you these special greetings.
Hi, everyone. I'm Governor Maura Healey. Massachusetts is the place where things begin. This is where ideas are born and movements get their spark. The Boston Tea Party is one of those iconic moments in American history and in our history as a city and a state. A time when regular folks said enough is enough and proved that ordinary people could rise up and change the world forever. It's been 250 years, but we haven't lost that spirit and we haven't forgotten our legacy. Today, Massachusetts is still the place that protects our fundamental rights. This is the place where you can be who you are, love who you love, access the care and education that you need. Massachusetts is first in freedom, and we're working every day to keep it that way. So happy 250th to the Boston Tea Party, and enjoy the celebration.
Hi everyone, it's Mayor Michelle Wu. On behalf of the entire city of Boston, I'm so excited to welcome all of you to the semi-quincentennial of the Boston Tea Party. This was a spark that ignited the American Revolution, that confirmed that Boston was a leader in doing what's not just right, but necessary when it comes to demanding and securing our freedoms. Today is an opportunity to reflect on, honor, and celebrate that history, to continue showing the country and the world what it means to shape a society with our founding principles of liberty and justice for all at its core. Thank you and congratulations to everyone who made today's event possible. From our teams at the city, to our wonderful partner organizations, volunteers, and of course, the reenactors who have come from all over the country to join us today. We're so grateful to all of you for marking this historic day. Happy anniversary to the Boston Tea Party.
You wouldn't think that a tax on tea would set off a revolution, but 250 years ago, we were a British colony, and tea was serious business. And it all boiled over at the Boston Tea Party, an event steeped in history. I'm Rosie Rios, Chair of America 250, the official entity charged with planning and orchestrating the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding. I'm thrilled to be with you all today to commemorate the spark that helped spur the American Revolution. As we approach July 4th, 2026, I invite you to go to america250.org to join us as we come together to commemorate our past, present, and our hopes and dreams for the future. Over the next 3 years, America 250 will be partnering to orchestrate many more fun events like today's reenactment, and we hope you'll join us for all of it. So whether you prefer green, chamomile, or dare I say it, Earl Grey, today's Tea Party celebration and our broader efforts to commemorate the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding are for you. Now, as my daughter would say, let's spill the tea.
Hello everybody, my name is Peter Abbott, and I am the British Consul General in Boston, His Majesty King Charles III's official representative in New England. Yes, you heard that right. 250 years ago, representatives of the British Crown were deeply unpopular here, but I'm pleased to say that times have changed. And today I am honoured to take part in the commemoration of the Boston Tea Party's 250th anniversary. And later on, I will be presenting Mayor Michelle Wu with an invoice for the £90,000 of tea that were destroyed in 1773, with interest. I am, of course, only joking. I am deeply proud to mark today's anniversary with you, together as firm friends and allies. It is, of course, as much our history as it is yours. Today, there are no two countries anywhere in the world that have a closer, deeper relationship than the United States and the United Kingdom. And this gives us hope that the divisions of war and conflict can, with time and through shared endeavors, be overcome. God bless America, and God save the King.
Thank you for being part of the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. This is the moment when the American Revolution began, and it began here in Boston with actions like this one. I'm Bob Allison. I chair the Revolution 250 Advisory Group. We are a consortium of 70 groups in Massachusetts planning ways to commemorate the beginnings of American independence. And over the next months, we have many events that happened here. Lexington and Concord, the Battle of Chelsea Creek, the Battle of Bunker Hill, Henry Knox bringing a train of artillery across Massachusetts to lift the siege of Boston. All of it happened here in Massachusetts. The American Revolution, as John Adams said, happened before a drop of blood was spilled at Lexington Green. He did not say this, but after Massachusetts completed the revolution, they went to Philadelphia to fill out the paperwork. Thank you for being part of this event. Thank you for commemorating the Tea Party and the beginnings of American independence.
Good evening and welcome to the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. My name is George Forrest Hamilton and I am the Grand Master of Masons of Massachusetts. On behalf of the 20,000 Freemasons belonging to 200 lodges throughout our Commonwealth, I bring you my warm fraternal greetings. For those of you who are wondering why the Freemasons are here tonight, I want to reset the scene from 250 years ago. We know the Boston Tea Party was executed by the Sons of Liberty. Among their prominent members were Massachusetts Freemasons John Hancock, Paul Revere, and Joseph Warren, who were members of the Lodge of St. Andrew. The last two were my predecessor as Grand Master. The Sons of Liberty met in the Green Dragon Tavern in Boston, which was owned by the Lodge of St. Andrews. It is believed that the Tea Party was planned there. The Lodge of St. Andrews still operates today and is one of our oldest lodges. The lodge has in its archives a note from the secretary written on December 16, 1773 that reads, "Lodge closed on account of too few members present till tomorrow evening." You can draw your own conclusion where the members were. This is just one of many examples when Freemasonry and the events that led to our new nation were intertwined. We will be sharing our common history over the next 3 years, but for now I hope you will enjoy the events of this evening. Thank you and God bless America.
Hello and welcome. My name is Sean Ford and I'm the Executive Director of the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum. I can't believe we're here, the actual 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party on this day. You know, a lot of people have been thanked this evening, but I think the people we really need to thank are the participants, the actual participants who destroyed the tea. I often find myself thinking, did they ever think that 250 years later, we would be reenacting and celebrating and doing what they did 250 years ago? It's amazing. I'd like to introduce two people who made this event happen, and I can't thank them enough. The co-chairs for the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party.
Thank you, Sean. I'm Jim Rooney, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce.
And I'm Martha Sheridan, President and CEO of Meet Boston. We are honored to serve as co-chairs of the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. This monumental event marks the start of the American Revolution and the country's celebration of 250 years of liberation. We couldn't be more pleased to have you all here tonight enjoying this extraordinary event.
And Martha and I want to thank Sean and the whole team at the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museums, the advisory board that helped us plan all of the activities that occurred over the past year, and all that have contributed to making this celebration what it needs to be in terms of demonstrating Boston's role in America's history. Thank you all for being here tonight.
A year ago today, I had the great and good fortune of being able to speak at the kickoff press conference for the Boston Tea Party 250 commemorative year at the Intercontinental Hotel Boston, the actual site where the historic Griffin's Wharf once stood and the Boston Tea Party took place. As I took note of the surroundings behind us and reflected on the moment in which we live, I could not help but say that when the first crate of tea hit the harbor's water, it would create ripples that would reverberate across history and stand the test of time. These ripples, created by a party of men who stood up against an injustice, continue to resonate around the world today, to foster revolutionary ideas and actions, and to break down the walls of division, as evidenced by you and I being in this hall in this moment. Now, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. In 1742, this hall completed construction. Given to the city as a gift by one of the wealthiest merchants of 18th century Boston, Peter Faneuil was described at the time of his death as a gentleman of very ample fortune and a most generous spirit. Yet we must acknowledge that this man's wealth was amassed through his complicit participation in the transatlantic slave trade, an original sin whose stains are marrow deep and whose legacy continues to haunt our nation centuries later. To this day, Mr. Faneuil's name continues to reside on this building, and his portrait hangs here behind me, reminding us of where we have come from and how far we have left to go. This building is one of the most visited sites in the country because it has symbolized so much to the people in its 280-year history. This building, which is now twice its original size from the time of the Boston Tea Party, has often been referred to as the Cradle of Liberty and has housed town meetings, orations, conventions, ceremonies, debates, memorials, rallies, protests, and much more. Just 2 days ago, individuals supported by family and friends took an oath in this hall, in these very seats, and became American citizens, proving that of the people, by the people, and for the people may still be an American dream come true. Political campaigns and careers have begun and have concluded here. Figures such as John Adams, his son John Quincy Adams, Thomas Jefferson, the Marquis de Lafayette, have all been eulogized here. Boston's longtime mayor, Thomas Menino, laid in state in this hall upon his passing in 2014. And just weeks ago, a great American and community organizer who believed deeply in democracy, John Walsh, was memorialized here. I say again, the Cradle of Liberty. A cradle is defined as an infant's bed or crib, implying that liberty itself was an infant in this hall, which might also suggest that liberty has perhaps grown or evolved. Or perhaps does this cradle hold the essence of liberty, forever in its infant state? Or is it something that is reborn from time to time? And what events or set of circumstances call up such an act? From this hall, the people have addressed the issues that have wronged and oppressed them, the issues that have threatened their desire for that free and harmonious society. From this hall, the people have advocated for liberties and human rights, civil rights and women's rights, native rights and labor rights, marriage rights and LGBTQIA+ rights. From this hall, the people have debated and advocated immigration, the environment, gun control, government, religion, war, and as you'll bear witness, taxation without representation in its many forms. Today, we will take a journey through time. We will bear witness to issues that have meant so much to so many, many who borrowed their inspiration from a party of men who risked their safety and security by boarding 3 vessels and disposing of a cargo of unrepresented tax tea into the icy waters of Boston Harbor 250 years ago. We will see what the tea's destruction meant to the people 50 years ago in 1973. Then, turning our clocks back an additional 100 years to the year 1873, to see why the people packed this very hall with such great enthusiasm and hear some of the very same words that were spoken here that night. And finally, we will wind our timepieces back to the 18th century, to the days and hours leading up to the destruction of the tea in 1773. You're not going to get a check, Mr. Abbott, but it is going to be an exciting evening. And again, I thank you all for joining us today. The year is 1973. The United States has officially withdrawn from Vietnam and ceased operations in and over Indochina. Americans are in the throes of the Watergate scandal, casting doubt and outrage among the populace. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is already tearing up the court this season. Wallpaper is truly the interior decorating trend, and you all owe us an apology for having to grow up with that. Color TVs are the thing. The cassette tape is picking up in popularity, although they lack the true audio quality of vinyl. Then there's the oil crisis. The United States, along with Canada, Japan, Britain, and the Netherlands, was 3 months into an oil embargo placed on countries that had supported Israel during the recent October Arab-Israeli conflict called the Yom Kippur War. The embargo would fortunately end in March of '74, but not before the price of oil skyrocketed roughly 300% from $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel. And today it's closer to $75 a barrel. President Richard Nixon introduced energy-saving initiatives, including gas stations shutting down pumps on the weekends and cutting down on oil heating deliveries. In the first week of December, just 2 weeks before the 200th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, Nixon's energy-saving measures went into full effect. There were fewer cars on the road and long lines at the pumps. Truckers, who were against the speed limit reduction initiatives, even blocked some highways in protest. In some instances, the National Guard had to be called out. The following quote was taken from the official 1977 final report of the Bicentennial of the United States of America. In Boston, on December 16th, a bicentennial reenactment of the Boston Tea Party was planned at the waterfront by Boston 200, the Bicentennial Planning Office established by Mayor Kevin White. It was the culmination of a weekend-long celebration of lectures, exhibits, street fairs, concerts, and even a Tea Party ball. The determination to protest that provoked the original Boston Tea Party was not absent at the official reenactment. You see, the People's Bicentennial Commission, a private anti-establishment organization protesting oil company profits as well as presidential conduct, had also organized a call to action. They said a new tyranny casts its shadow over America. It's time for the second Boston Tea Party. Bring your own posters, banners, effigies depicting modern-day corporate and political tyranny. So that afternoon, the crowd braved freezing temperatures and Boston's first snow of the season. We're grateful today for 47 degrees. Hundreds had gathered here, in and around this very building, with their banners and posters of freeze profits, not people. Put the heat on the oil companies. Long live the American Revolution. And heed the people, tax the rich, jail the tyrant, as well as carrying effigies of Nixon and the oil companies. The masses marched down Congress Street toward the waterfront, where more than 20,000 people swarmed the original location of the Boston Tea Party to witness a reenactment of the 1773 destruction of the tea. Some 30 colonial reenactors and local militiamen in breeches and ruffles lowered into the water replica tea chests from the Beaver II, a reproduction of the original brig, located at the previous iteration of the Boston Tea Party Ship and Museum. As they did this, the reenactors shouted, "Down with King George," while the protesters mingling in the crowd, hanging off the Congress Street Bridge and waterfront, shouted back, "Down with King Richard." Then, rowboats filled with members of the People's Commission took over the Beaver II, while signs reading "Impeach Nixon" and "Put the heat on the oil companies" hung alongside effigies overhead, not unlike the scene during the Stamp Act riots in August of 1765. When the colonial reenactors finished dumping the tea, the People's Bicentennial Commission dumped empty oil barrels over the side of the Beaver II, demanding that the oil companies pay. No single cause had a monopoly there. According to the New York Post, Catherine Kane, the director of Boston 200, said that she was delighted with the way the celebration went off, but that there was no way for there to not be some confusion. Only in Boston, she said, could this happen. So many divergent groups and diverse opinions being expressed. Boston has a tremendous respect for diversity, and that's what makes us great. We now turn our clocks back another century to the year 1873. General Ulysses S. Grant is in his second term as President of the United States. The American Civil War is not yet a decade removed. Wounds and American humanity have still not healed and are often reopened, as in the case of the Colfax Massacre in Louisiana. The West is wild as Jesse James and the Younger Gang pull off the first successful train robbery. Barbed wire is showcased in an Illinois fair for the first time. Out in New York City, P.T. Barnum's circus debuts the greatest show on earth, and Levi Strauss & Co. receive a patent for little copper rivets they intend to use on their new improved style of work pants. And for those of you who don't know, those are jeans. That's where those little things come from. But also in this very same year, women do not have equal rights. They are disenfranchised. They cannot vote. It was this injustice that caused thousands to gather in this hall 150 years ago in commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. Using language from the time, I'd like to set the scene for you. Long before the hour appointed for the opening of the meeting, the crowd began to assemble. And at 4 o'clock, the hall was literally packed solid with a dense mass of humanity, composed of ladies and gentlemen representing all classes in life who were interested in the object of the meeting, the elevation of women to an equality with men in citizenship, no less than the celebration of the patriotic deed of our forefathers. At 4:05 p.m., there was a rustle at the side entrance, and soon the former Colonel Thomas Wentworth Higginson was seen heading a long procession composed of prominent friends of the cause who were assigned seats on the platform. Their appearance on the platform was the signal for a round of hearty applause. A round of hearty applause. And after that applause had subsided, Colonel Higginson ascended the platform and, after calling the meeting to order, spoke as follows.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have been requested to call this meeting to order. We honestly had not expected so large a gathering. This hall has been called the Cradle of Liberty, and women have the right to understand anything so domestic as a cradle. But the cradle they rock today is the cradle of women's rights. We are here to dedicate old Faneuil Hall to yet another 100 more years of taxation without representation. For years, the women of New England knew what was coming if men did not. 4 years before the men did their part of tossing the tea into Boston Harbor, 300 women of Boston in 1 week sent in their names rejecting tea. 126 unmarried ladies also sent in their names and pledged themselves to renounce tea. In 1773, a great meeting was held in the Old South Meeting House to take measures against the landing of the tea. And 3 prominent men of that meeting were Adams, Quincy, and Phillips. From that day to this, there has never been a time a Phillips has been wanting to speak more. I have the honor of introducing one of the best representatives of that name, who is to speak to you this evening, Mr. Wendell Phillips.
Thank you. Thank you, Colonel Higginson. The old story which makes this week illustrious in the town annals is short and familiar to all. For 12 years previous to 1773, the British Parliament was poor. Because of the French and Indian War, it was not merely principle that led them to claim the right to tax the American public, it was the need of money. First, they taxed the sugar, and they taxed our paper under the Stamp Act, which in course led to repeal. But then they put a tax upon glass, paint, lead, and tea. Samuel Adams, the greatest statesman that God lent to this epic, got it into his brain that he could be sent back to England by letting it flow out of the harbor. It could be accomplished by no other way. 340 chests of tea were emptied into the harbor, a small amount to waste. But the act was of momentous consequence, as being the first step in which the colonies severed the tie with the mother country. That is the short story, a seemingly very short story. But let us remember that a man has a duty to perform and a dictum to uphold and principles to uphold, that he must save them from the government, that he can be ruled, taxed, and punished without his consent. That is all. This meeting is assembled here today with one purpose, so that women shall have a place at the ballot box. The Spillers of Tea in 1773 elaborated on the philosophy that made us a nation. The materials they prepared the century before we cannot show, and the century after cannot show us. Tear down the tyranny of the capitalist, lift up the laborer, and summon into the ranks some moral influences of both sexes. The social agencies are as wide as the political 100 years ago. Gibbon, he wrote of the downfall of the Roman Empire. Well, so a boy is born today who writes of the downfall of the American Republic, unless these things are attended to. Only the social, added to the political elements of our forefathers, can change us. Philanthropy, it is said, allows 2 blades of grass to grow where one did before. But philanthropy can do better work than this. It can allow a free man room to raise a blade of grass. That is the work we are bid to accomplish. That is the only use we can make of this hall in which we stand. If this is to be the cradle of liberty for another 100 years, let it be as advanced as the social changes as 100 years gone by. America, her cause is the cause of human freedom. That is the toast I propose here today. Our fathers, they shut the door on many people in this land, narrowing this sentiment down to a white male republic. Well, thank God they lent us a root. If they did an imperfect work, they did not plant an imperfect principle. Douglas Stewart says, it is man who plants wrong principles who does the greatest harm to the race. Friends, our fathers, if they did an imperfect work, they never trampled on our principle. Thank you. At this time, I believe I'm to call on Mrs. Mary Ashton Livermore. Mrs. Livermore.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. To speak here tonight in Faneuil Hall with a picture of Sam Adams and those other great men of the Revolution goes back to that historic event to which this Tea Party represents. The first principles of that hour, taxation without representation. We cannot go back to the details of that evening a century ago and the events that immediately followed it without seeing all that our fathers did, not to make a stand that they were heavily taxed. It was a small tax, a tax of 3 pence, which was simply laid to maintain the right and determination of George III to tax the people without their consent. The British government made their claim that they had a right to levy taxes on their subjects, anywhere without representation at all, and a great stand was made by the party that threw the tea overboard. Today, we are struggling against the same things: taxation without representation. The women's suffrage movement has often been spoken of as a new movement. It is, but is based on old principles, the principles that were fought for and maintained on the field of battle 100 years ago. Today, we are simply carrying out those principles. As I entered the hall this evening, a lady put into my hand a scrap of paper and asked me if I would be kind enough to read it. It's dated December 2nd, 1773, a fortnight before the Tea Party, and it was written by an aged daughter of liberty, Mrs. Ames, a tailoress by trade. The poem reads, "Parliament, as axe has made, that will destroy us all and ruin the trade, to raise the tax, as we are told, that will enslave us all, both young and old. Look out, poor Boston, make a stand. Don't suffer any tea to land, for if it once gets in here, then it's farewell to liberty most dear." This is the voice of a woman 100 years ago, and she had something of the same spirit that we, her children, possess today. James Otis said, "There is no such thing as possible as a virtual representation. I must have a voice in the election of the person who represents me, or I am not represented. Even if my husband goes to the poll having the same purpose I have, and he would cast a vote exactly as I would cast it, if I have not delegated him to cast my vote in addition to his own, he cannot represent me. This great principle underlines all government today. It is that those who are governed shall have a share in the government. It is the demands that women are making. Since they are governed, since the laws are made for them, since they are punished for violation of those laws, hung if they have committed murder, put in jail if they steal, then it is right that they should have a voice in the making of those laws. Women need to have a great deal changed that is unfair for them. The right of a collegiate education, the right of voting, and a great many other rights must be established. We have come to see clearly that it is idle to remove objections till the underlying causes have been removed. Thank you. I now think it is fitting to bring to this podium a man who dares to uphold the divine doctrine of the right, the Reverend James Freedom Clark.
Thank you, Mrs. Livermore. Thank you. We look back 100 years today and find ourselves in a strange, sad Boston. Doubt, confusion, appalling difficulties are in the minds of men and women. Great Britain, the mother country, like a cruel stepmother, asks of its children that which they cannot give and remain with the essentials of freedom. They are to be taxed and have no voice themselves as to what they shall pay. But how are they to help themselves? Having no votes in the British Parliament, how are they to make their influence felt? They are only colonists. They are looked down upon as children. All the power is in the hands of those that oppress them. Great Britain, their opinion is against them. For colonists to resist the mother country is a new and unheard of thing. So spoke the timidly wise in Boston 100 years ago. First was the tax upon the sugar in 1764, an act of which Mr. James Otis gave us direction, laying down that a people cannot be taxed without their consent and representation. An act of which he said set people a-thinking more than they had done in their whole lives. When the Stamp Act passed the following year, the people did more than thinking, rallying into mobs so passionate about their rights to life, liberty, and property that they became intoxicated with their anger and outrage. Destructive mobs that rallied at the base of a tree in the name of that liberty. The destruction so definitive, it went far beyond a lieutenant governor's home. Scars and wounds were prevalent through Parliament's continued Townshend Acts of 1767, as the people turned to other, lesser violent means by which to show their mother country their importance of being heard. And perhaps it was ultimately the massacre, not 3 years before the tea, and those 5 people of this town that gave both the government and her people pause. It might be unbeknownst to you, but on that very day in March of 1770, when blood was spilt not 1 block from where we sit now, that those friends in Parliament secured the repeal of the tax on the glass, lead, paint, and paper, but left the tax upon the tea, only to reinforce it with the Tea Act 3 years later in 1773. The resentment and outrage returned, though through different means, thrusting us into open riot with the tea and rebellion. Why, then, do we celebrate it? It was an illegal proceeding. It was breaking the law. It was plainly a riot. It was an offense against order, yes, but it was breaking the lower law and obedience to the higher law. And why do women celebrate it here today? Because new occasions teach new duties. Because they apply the old precedents to new necessities. Because they see that as 100 years ago, what the country needed was a firm resistance to arbitrary English power. So now what the country needs as the next thing to be done is that women shall take part with men in all political duties. That her work shall be made commiserate with her power. That the old theories of women that made them toys, ornaments in one, idols at another, shall be replaced with a serious recognition of their duty and right to become all that God made them and meant them to be. I, for one, share these opinions. I believe that what women need is equal work with man, equal opportunities for education, equal power in legislation, equal place in the church, the college, and the state. I see that as civilization advances, the sphere of women has steadily enlarged. I cannot put any limit to it. I do not know who has a right to limit it. I think that society will become much purer and happier when women have to take part with men in all the work of the world. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you. It is now my honor and privilege to ask on this occasion to this lectern, Mr. Frederick Douglass.
I am quite unexpectedly called to say my word. And I hardly know, in consideration of the fact that I am required to be in another place in a few minutes, that I ought to occupy any of your time. I was just meditating an escape. I'm up to that trick, you know. And when I was called upon to say a few words to you, anything that I could say in connection with the great subject has been as well and better said by Mrs. Livermore. I thought, however, I would say a few words about the vastly better condition of the colored man in this country by his being allowed to vote. However, before I had this illustration, before the experiment was tried, I saw the principle, and I was decidedly in favor of the extension of suffrage to women. Indeed, from the beginning of my connection with the abolitionists of this country, I saw the principle in which I demanded freedom for the black man extended equally to the woman. I believe this government will never be in a safe, healthy condition until all the good people under it and all the bad people under it also shall have the right to bring whatever good or whatever bad there is in them into the government. And I am so free of my religious opinion, so entirely free of the notion of the total depravity of man, and such a believer in the preponderating good of human nature, that I believe all the bad can be trusted with all the good, that all the ignorance can be trusted with all the intelligence, that this country will never know what it ought to be until all the people living under it have some method of diffusing or infusing themselves into the government. I know I'm not giving you much light on the subject. I'm only giving you my creed. I sometimes wonder why men make speeches at all. I used to wonder why men made abolition speeches and argued the right of freedom for the Negro, or why men even differed about it. The point enunciated by the abolitionists was clear and simple and did not require argument. It was only every man is himself or his self. We say today every woman is herself. And if nobody can be represented by anybody else, then therefore she should have a voice in the government. Thank you. Well, I'm not giving you such a good speech that I could write if I was at home. But it's all I have to say. I would say, though, that I am happy to be speaking today, and I'm glad to say that there are colored men in this country who have not forgotten the rights of others, having received their own rights. In conclusion, I would say that I am for women's voting. I am for women's education. I am for letting women do everything in this world they are capable of doing and being everything they are capable of being and being well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Douglass. Thank you. I now introduce to you a woman who has made efficient her labors of our cause in the great state of Maine this past year. Please welcome to our podium, Mrs. Margaret Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Lucy. Women and men of New England, The event we celebrate very naturally makes the question of taxation without representation the chief topic of discussion here this evening. But I have often asked myself, and I would like to ask the women of this nation, if the property of women had never been taxed, or if women should be immediately relieved from the unjust burden of taxation because they are not represented, should we be satisfied? I tell you, nay. Our fathers set out with the declaration that taxation without representation is tyranny, but they soon began to realize that although a man might not be possessed of property to be taxed, his life, his liberty, and happiness were of even more importance. And while he was not allowed to represent himself, these were in the keeping and at the disposal of others who might or might not desire to do justice by him. Thus, by degrees, they were able to comprehend the true principle of representative government. I wish the grand act of heroism performed by the men of 1773 had been in defense of the highest instead of lowest principle of representative government. For disguise it as you will, the fact stands out. The rights of property were first to be considered, and I blush to say it, there are men today who say that if women own property and pay taxes, they ought to have their representation. They do not object to that. No. It is the admission of the masses, of the ignorant women who might be dangerous to the government. And now, the blackest-hearted traitors are about to be welcomed back into the forgiving embrace of the government whose life they sought to destroy. The exact point of safety to the government is when all men govern all women. But when women ask to be recognized, danger begins. If any standard of intelligence, of knowledge, of virtue, or of morality were fixed by which to judge the fitness of men, then we should be willing to submit to the same test. But if gentlemen claim your right to represent yourselves by virtue of your manhood, then we have a right to represent ourselves by virtue of our womanhood. O men of New England, men of New England, if you, in applying the principles your fathers sought to establish, prove yourselves unworthy sons of the immortal sires who dared strike a blow for freedom on this spot 100 years ago, believe me, your children will never meet as we do now to celebrate your deeds of honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Campbell. I'd like to read a letter from Theodore Weld, his wife Angelina, and her sister, Sarah Grimke. Dear Mrs. Stone, we cannot be with you at the 100th anniversary of the grand old Boston Tea Party, but we shout back to you the old-time anti-slavery, all hail! That famous tea which Boston steeped so strong but wouldn't drink in 1773 has kept the world awake for 100 years. The decoction then made Boston Harbor so drugged Massachusetts Bay that it tastes of it still. It soaked into the land all along the shore till, in the Revolution, it boiled over from Bunker Hill to Yorktown. Then slavery cooled it down to freezing, and for a half a century, it was solid ice. At last, the spirit of the old Tea Party came to life, and with it, the tea came back to boiling point. But though its steam jets could melt ice, it took volcanic fire of Mr. Garrison to dissolve the iron of slavery. Plied with that, the fetters have dropped from the last slave, and today, fast and far, the chains of women are melting down in that same glorious old white heat. Godspeed the day. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Stephen S. Foster.
Thank you, Colonel. I beg only a moment of your time. My wife, Miss Abby Foster, begs your pardon and indulgence as she is unable to attend this evening, but has sent a letter in her stead that I shall read to you momentarily. The resistance of the colonists in 1773 was a plain violation of the law of the land. I am compelled to urge all women to resist the tyrannical laws of today, which deprive you of the ballot. My wife and I intend on resisting the oppression resulting from the current taxation without representation. Abby would chuckle at my telling you this, but we refuse to pay taxes on our own property. I have told those officers of the law that I have paid the last cent of taxes voluntarily to a government that puts its boot on the necks of my wife and daughter. Yeah. Now, Mrs. Stone, this letter is addressed to you. Miss Stone, it was just 36 years since last May, since Angelina Grimke, sitting in the gallery of Faneuil Hall, longed to speak in reply to a slaveholder who had taken the platform at our New England Anti-Slavery Society convention, but dared not do so because the brethren would not like it. Behold the change in public sentiment since that period. No women, to my knowledge, ever claimed the right to participate with men on equal terms in mass conventions till the spring of 1838, when that claim was made in the New England Anti-Slavery Society's convention in May of that year. That claim created such excitement and opposition that it rent asunder the anti-slavery societies throughout the country and subjected those who sustained to it the most bitter prosecution. Now, who so ignorant, bigoted, and besotted as to oppose the public speaking of women from Atlantic to Pacific? How few are the mass conventions that would forbid a woman speaking on their platforms? Let no one who is striving for woman's full enfranchisement be for a moment discouraged. We are on the eve of the accomplishment of our purpose. In great haste, yours in faith, Abby K. Foster. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. It is now with the utmost respect that I introduce the founder of the feast tonight, Mrs. Lucy Stone.
Colonel Higginson must not give me credit which does not belong to me. The idea of this tea party did not originate with me. An old gentleman in Maine suggested it to our constant friend and co-worker, Margaret W. Campbell, and she to me. And I said, I think it is a capital idea, and we will do it. The tea party held here 100 years ago was very different than this. And here are the same walls and the same roof, but there is no tramp of armed men, no such eager agitation. Yet the principle involved, which made that tea party so worthy of celebration, hangs unsettled in the scale today. If we can make it keenly felt and clearly understood here and now that the taxation of women without representation is as great an injustice as was that done to the men of olden time. This day will be worthy to be held in grateful remembrance by our children's children. How can we do it? Men, look at us and say, you all seem so contented and comfortable. The government protects you, and you should bear your part in the cost of that protection. The government of Great Britain said just the same to the men of olden time. We protect you, and you must pay for that protection. The women of the olden time surrendered their tea to help in this great struggle. The wrong done to men 100 years ago by the government of England bears no comparison to the injustice and the wrong done to women by the government of this country today. We are taxed and we have no representation. Great Britain never dared do to the colonies what Massachusetts does to the women of this state today. Such unspeakable humiliation the government of England never dreamed of imposing upon any man. Why should one sane, grown person ask another what he may do with his own? No wife here has any legal right to or control of her young children. If the government of Great Britain had ventured to interfere between any father and his legal right to his child, a voice from people from peer to throne would have rung in his ears, a tone. We have no jury trial by our peers. By the statutes of this state, the same crime is punished with a different and a heavier penalty when it is committed by a woman than when it is committed by a man. Oh, men. Oh, men of Massachusetts, how can we make you know that the injustice and the wrong you are today doing to the women is greater than that which your fathers resisted, and that it is calling for as loudly a repeal? What more can we do? We have petitioned, we have remonstrated, and we have been spurned with contempt from the State House on yonder hill. We have sent lecturers, we have held conventions, we have scattered tracts by the thousands. What more can we do? If I had my way, I would bring the 34,000 tax-paying women of Massachusetts who pay 1/10 of the entire state tax, the larger army of women as well, who though may not be directly taxed, they have life and liberty to protect. And they should form a long procession, and I would place them at the door of Faneuil Hall. Then I would summon the men from Barnstable to Berkshire, and in single file they should march under the eyes of these women whom they tax without representation, to whom they give no jury trial of their peers, whom they claim the right to imprison, fine, and hang, while they allow them no voice in the law may work such terrible results. The women of the olden time threw away the tea. Sisters, who of you will join me in a pledge that when the 4th of July in 1876 comes, we will take no part in its centennial celebration. In that day, we will fasten our doors, draw down our curtains, and close our shutters. A few of the older women in every city and village clad in black should stand in groups on the most prominent thoroughfares. They should hold black banners inscribed in blood-red letters. We are taxed, and we have no representation. We are governed without our consent. We are suffering at the hands of a government by the same injustice Great Britain inflicted upon the men of 1776. And a great deal worse and more besides. Go toll the bells.
Thus ended a most inspiring and significant evening filled with these speeches and poetry and foot stomping and song. Cake and biscuits were served with an appropriate cup of tea, of which they ran out due to the masses. Unfortunately, we don't have this for you tonight. 3,000 people were present, with several hundred hoping to obtain admittance outside. The evening receipts raised today's equivalent of $17,314, which went to the New England Suffrage Association. Many ladies present had declared their intentions to celebrate the anniversary of the Boston Tea Party every year until women were enfranchised. It would be another 46 years until women were given the right to vote. And I just want to go off script for 2 seconds here while I give a couple people a heart attack in the back. I just truly want to take this moment to thank these champions of justice that were just behind me. Those patriots who called out with Wendell Phillips in the same speech the unfinished nature of the revolution, whose roots were pure and would provide further harvest, but whose fruits had shut their eyes on one side to women and on the other side to the Negro. We continue to reap that harvest today because groups of committed Americans continue to draw inspiration from those heroic acts committed 250 years ago. That long lineage of freedom fighters like Mel King and Melnia Cass and so many others in this city, who with Bayard Rustin agreed that to accept an injustice is to perpetuate it, or with Dr. King that justice delayed is justice denied, or with Fannie Lou Hamer that nobody's free until everybody's free. They have all worked since then to make this a more perfect union, allowing us to say today what could not be said 150 years ago, let alone 250 years ago. Madam Governor and Madam Mayor, and to ensure that the great-great-great-grandson of a slave could call themselves the Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion. now to the moments we've all been waiting for. So far tonight, we've witnessed how a single unified act of defiance has resonated throughout the past 250 years. Each era having gleaned their inspiration from a party of ordinary citizens that came together to defy a tyrannical government, discovered for themselves what was worth the fight. They discovered their tea. What is your tea? What will the tea be in 50 years, 100 years, 250 years from now? Will the Boston Tea Party still be remembered and commemorated? In a moment, we'll go back in time another 100 years. In 1773, Massachusetts was a colony of Great Britain under colonial rule, and its citizens were English subjects. The passage of the Tea Act in that year gave special permissions to the East India Company to recoup lost revenue and to keep the company on secure financial footing. In a time when this and all meeting spaces did not admit women and people of color, official town meetings were only open to property-owning white men. It took an illegal meeting of the body of the people to include unpropertied white men. These gatherings occurred at a time prior to an almost unthinkable widespread idea of American independence, a time that precedes these United States of America. The date is the 29th of November, 1773. In the 14th year of the reign of His Majesty George III, King of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, defender of the faith over Britain's dominion in America.
Hey, friends, brethren, countrymen, that worst of plague, the detested tea, shipped for this port by the East India Company, is now arrived at the harbor. The hour of destruction, oh manly opposition to the machinations of tyranny stares you in the face. Every friend to his country, to himself, and to posterity is called upon to come forward and meet at Faneuil at 9 o'clock this day, at which time the bells will ring to make united and successful resistance to the last, worst, and most destructive measure of administration. Huzzah! Huzzah!
We now call to order this meeting of the body of the people of Boston and neighboring townships here in Faneuil Hall this Monday, the 29th of November, 1773 at 9 o'clock, for the purposes of conferring, advising, and determining upon the most proper and effective manner of preventing the unloading, receiving, or vending of this detestable tea sent by the United East India Tea Company, part of which having arrived aboard the vessel Dartmouth in our harbor evening last. In order to maintain due regularity, we now open the floor to discussion on said tea in Captain Hall's vessel, and a proposal by Mr. Samuel Adams that the tea should be returned to the same bottom from whence she came, without it being unloaded into these shores. We now call these proceedings to order. The floor recognizes Most Worshipful Dr. Joseph Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. The late transaction, the Parliament's plan to send this tea to these colonies, is a violent attack upon the liberties of America. The taxing of colonial citizens without our consent is an infringement upon the rights to life, liberty, and property. These taxes, mind you, will not yield consent to the people of Massachusetts, nor her sister colonies, but will, in fact, support our royally appointed governors, officials, and justices, as well as the military regiment stationed here in America. I say it is the duty of every subject in this room, every American on this continent, to oppose this ministerial plan of parliamentary taxation. Oppose the Tea Act. Every American owes this to their country, to themselves, and to their posterity. Let it be known, anyone who aids or abets in the unloading, receiving, or vending of this tea is an enemy to their country. Therefore, I show support for the proposition and apprehend that the detested tea be sent back from whence it came. The owner of Captain Hall's vessel, Dartmouth, Mr. Francis Roach, can order it upon such demands of this assembled body of people.
You are out of order, Mr. Roach. In order to maintain civility, you must be recognized by this body in order to speak. Dr. Warren, have you concluded your remarks? And do you concede to hear from the owner of said vessel? Thank you, Dr. Warren. Mr. Francis Roach, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dr. Warren, sir, I must object to the impracticability of returning my vessel with the tea on board for the following reasons. First and foremost upon the matter, the Dartmouth cannot leave Boston Harbor unless it is properly cleared by and receives a pass from the Customs House. Secondly, I and my family's firm would most certainly lose the freight of the tea and incur an unfair, mind you, financial hardship. Furthermore, it is practically a certainty that Dartmouth would be seized at London for want of a proper clearance and the non-reimportation policies therein, even if she were to securely make way out of Boston Harbor safely, of which I am not entirely certain. And moreover, and to conclude, I am not without doubt that the Dartmouth would be seized by His Majesty's officers of the Navy, either before or immediately leaving this port.
Mr. Moderator.
Floor recognizes Mr. Samuel Adams.
This protest by my Quaker friend, although appreciated, is of no hardship. Is it not uncommon for the owner of a vessel to make a protest to the Customs House when circumstance presents that certain goods on board their vessel have been lost at sea or destroyed in a storm or any other unforeseen incident? I move that Mr. Roach is currently compelled by a political storm to send the tea back from whence it came. Might he safely and honestly protest that a mob of several thousand compelled him to send the tea back without the duties being paid, and that it was absolutely necessary for the safety of his person and property to do so? Yes, on the whole, I believe Mr. Roach could protest in this manner. In fact, it is a good reason for protesting and is valid by law in all intents and purposes. Mr. Roach, it is in your best interest, sir, to comply with the resolutions of this body of the people and not further incense them, as they now have the power in their hands and are able and are certain to carry out their resolutions into execution at any event. Thank you, Mr. Williams.
We now have a motion before us. Should the tea, having recently arrived in the Dartmouth, be returned to London in the same bottom from whence she came without being unloaded unto these shores, and Mr. Roach and his Captain Hall here be ordered to comply?
Aye, first. I second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes are favored. The motion is passed. Mr. Roach, you and your Captain Hall here are acquainted now that should you suffer the tea to be landed in this colony, it will be at your peril. Do you understand?
I have been so advised. You may expect upon the instant I will enter my protests against these proceedings accordingly.
Go ahead, Mr. Roach.
And the floor now recognizes Mr. Edward Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Now that it has been determined that this pernicious cargo of tea should not be landed, I put forth for the security of Captain Hall's vessel of cargo and the others when they arrive, this body appoint a watch of 25 men strong to stand guard and assist the captains and crews to take care that the tea is not smuggled out of the holds of the ships or the ships being removed without our power.
There is a motion before this body concerning the security of Captain Hall's vessel and cargo, that a watch comprised of 25 men be appointed.
Aye. First. I second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is passed. Mr. Proctor, you have been instrumental in recent weeks, along with Mr. Molyneux, in organizing individuals to protest the tea consignee merchants in anticipation of the tea's arrival. To accompany your proposal, I now appoint you captain of the First Night's Watch. With your permission, of course.
Accepted with gratitude, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Proctor. The floor now recognizes Mr. Paul Revere.
Let me be the first man to volunteer for this watch. Mr. Williams, Mr. Proctor, I know that there are many in this room who agree with me when I say that this political plan of the British administration will divide the colonies and affect our trade, which we depend upon for our subsistence, will in end be destroyed. The tribute laid upon the taxation of this tea will be fixed and established, and our American liberties, which we have struggled for so long, granted to us by our charter, will be lost to us in our posterity, and that cannot be. This attack made upon us is designed, no doubt, for other colonies who will not surrender their sacred rights and liberties into the hands of an infamous ministry.
Well said, Paul.
Therefore, now is the time for all of us to rise in opposition to this violation of the liberties of all. And if I may, in some small part, contribute to my utmost, then I am here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Revere. You may see Mr. Proctor for the particulars of your enlistment. All volunteers of the occasion may now advance and submit their names to the clerk. The floor recognizes Mr. John Hancock.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, I am to inform the people that since our meetings this morning, I've been called into the home of a justice of the peace and informed that Governor Hutchinson has required the magistrates of this town to use their utmost endeavors to suppress any riots of the people that might ensue on account of the tea. I observe this is yet another instance of the restless machinations of that tool of power, an enemy of his country, Mr. Hutchinson. Mr. Williams, may I consent? Of course. Thank you. I am also to inform the people that, well, at the recent Governor's Council meeting, at which I was in attendance, it seems the tea consignees have brought forth a proposal. Misters Clark, Faneuil, Winslow, and the Governor's two sons have requested that the Council take possession of the tea here in Boston. This tea would then be under the protection of the government only until those petitioners could be at liberty to openly and safely manage it, or until they receive new instructions from the East India Company. Well, after many lengthy discussions, the Honorable Council has nobly refused having anything to do with it. I then move that it might be discovered and resolved if Mr. Hutchinson brought forth said proposal himself to serve the interests of his two sons, who I need not remind you have been handpicked by the East India Company, are now consigned to sell this detested tea. I know it is most desirous for this body to hear from those East India merchant consignees. However, I must acquaint the people that Mr. John Singleton Copley, acting on behalf of the Clarks, has informed me that they and the other consignees, having just received their instructions from the East India Company on board the Dartmouth last evening, well, they've not had a chance to meet, to have a joint review and bring their proposals to this body, and are therefore desirous of further space for that purpose.
Out of a great tenderness for these persons and a strong desire to bring this matter to a conclusion, the body of the people will let them meet upon the instant and delay to hear from the tea consignees until 9 o'clock on the morrow. This meeting is adjourned until that time. The body now recognizes Town Selectman Mr. John Scully, Esquire.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Last evening, I was delivered a letter from the consignees indicating their intentions regarding the cargo of tea. It reads, "Sir, we are sorry that we could not return to the town satisfactory answers to their too late messages to us respecting the teas. We beg leave to acquaint the gentlemen selectmen that since we have since received our orders from the Honorable East India Company, we still retain a disposition to do all in our power to give satisfaction to the town. But, as we understood from you, this can only be effected by nothing less than our sending back the teas. We beg leave to say that this is utterly out of our power to do. We do now declare to you our readiness to store the teas with the Governor's Council until we shall have an opportunity of writing to our constituents and shall receive further orders respecting them. We do most sincerely wish that the town, considering the unexpected difficulties devolved upon us, will be satisfied with what we now offer. Signed, sirs, your humble servants, the consignee.
I beg of the moderator of this meeting, I have received a letter from our royal governor, His Excellency Thomas Hutchinson, requiring me to read a proclamation to the people here assembled.
Why can't he tell us himself?
I must be allowed to speak.
No. You need to say that the governor must be allowed to speak. This man cowering away in his country estate, hiding from his people, who has betrayed the trust of his people, is also the same man that is entangled with these tea consignees through blood and marriage. His own sons are 2 of the 7 with whom we quarrel. The overt nepotism being forced down our throats is as detestable as the tea itself, and I, for one, will not drink it down! I cannot think that our dear governor's mind is clear when debating the issues before us. Shame! Shame!
Order! Thank you, Mr. Molyneux. I now put it forth to the people whether Sheriff Stephen Greenleaf shall be allowed to read his governor's proclamation. It is clear, Mr. Greenleaf, that this body wishes to hear His Excellency's proclamation. So be it, sir.
By order of the governor, a proclamation to Jonathan Williams, Esquire, acting as moderator at an assembly of people and to the people assembled. Whereas printed notifications were, on Monday the 29th instant, posted in diverse places within the town of Boston and published in the newspapers of that day, calling upon the people to assemble together for certain unlawful purposes in such notifications mentioned. And whereas great numbers of people belonging to the town of Boston and several others belonging to diverse other towns in the province did assemble in the said town of Boston to consult, debate, and resolve upon ways and means for carrying such unlawful purposes into execution, openly violating, defying, and setting at naught the good and wholesome laws of the province and the constitution of government under which they live. In faithfulness to my trust, and as His Majesty's representative within the province, I am bound to bear testimony against this violation of the laws, and I warn, exhort, and require you, each and every one of you, thus unlawfully assembled, forthwith to disperse and surcease all further unlawful activity at your utmost peril. Given unto my hand at Milton in the province aforesaid, the 30th day of November, 1773, and in the 14th year of His Majesty's reign, by His Excellency's command, Thomas Hutchinson. God save the King!
Thank you, Mr. Greenleaf. It cannot be ignored. We now have a motion before this body. Shall this assembly disperse and surcease all further proceedings according to our governor's requirement?
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Adams.
It cannot be helped but to point out the ill conduct of our Excellency. Oh, I see here at this proclamation that this was initially intended for and addressed to Colonel John Hancock, Esquire, but his name has been scratched out. This is yet another instance of the governor's implacable hatred for the cause of his countrymen, in that he assumed, supposed, hoped, or even wished that the gentleman Hancock would be moderator. As it is, Mr. Williams's name has been written in. I imagine that upon finding out that Mr. Williams was moderator, that it was written in by you, Mr. Greenleaf, or someone else. The shame, the atrocity on display here within is unconscionable. I am so provoked, I can hardly bring myself to read such repeated insults on such a respectable body of countrymen. In faithfulness to my trust, and as His Majesty's representative within the province, I am bound. Is he that shadow of a man who can scarcely support his withered carcass or his hoary head? Is he a representation of our Majesty? I move that a free and sensible people, when they feel themselves injured, should always have the right to consult for their safety. Why, I uphold to you that this meeting is so far from being riotous. I mean, you are as orderly and regular as any group of people whatsoever. As the House of Representatives. As the House of Commons themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Mr. Greenleaf, out of due respect for your office, it is clear that this body intends to continue. I have no doubt that the governor awaits a reply to his proclamation. You may now take your leave and deliver it, sir. now move on to the real business before this body, concerning the agents of the East India Tea Company, Monsieur Clark, his two sons, Mr. Winslow, Mr. Faneuil, and the governor's two sons. This body now recognizes Mr. John Singleton Copley.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I come on behalf and bring forth the concerns of the Messrs. Clark and the other consignees. I submit that if they are to attend and meet with the people, that no harm shall come to them, and they be allowed to return to the castle safely.
It is most desirable that they meet with this body upon the instant, and therefore your concern is duly noted. The question is now before us. Should Monsieur Clark and his two sons and the others come to this meeting, will this body provide safe passage for them to do so? Do I have support in this matter? All in favor say aye.
Aye. Get them.
Very well. Mr. Copley, you may now take your leave to collect your friends and family through safe passage and bring them before this body, whereupon you may inform them that they will find the resentment of the people most present.
I shall do my utmost.
And what if your utmost is not good enough, sir?
Mr. Hancock.
And what if your words and the words of this body are not enough for your father-in-law, Mr. Clark, to come into town?
Mr. Hancock.
Then what? You return to us empty-handed, hat in hand?
They have assured me, sir, as they have assured you all, they will give every consideration its request its due consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Copley. You may now take your leave.
Thank you. And in respect to my journey to Castle Island, I request of this body 2 hours' time to deliver.
2 hours, Mr. Copley. 2 hours. This body now calls forward Captain James Hall, ship's master of the recently arrived vessel Dartmouth, Mr. John Rowe, partial owner of Captain Bruce's vessel Eleanor, and Mr. John Timmins, factor for the brig Beaver. Captain Hall, I am to remind you that you are forbidden to aid or assist in the unloading of this detestable tea, and should you remain ship's master, to return it to London. Do you comply with this body?
Mr. Williams, I will comply with the request of this body, and so shall my ship's owner.
Thank you, Captain. Mr. Rowe, it is the expectation of this body that you and your vessel will comply by the same circumstances as Mr. Roach and his Captain Hall here, to return the tea to London in the same bottom in which she arrives.
The Eleanor is under Captain Bruce's charge. However, I will use my utmost endeavors to ensure that it is returned per the request of this body, and I will give my immediate attention to and advice upon the arrival of said ship. Might I also add, Mr. Moderator, that I am very sorry that Captain Bruce has any tea on board, which is very true, for it hath given me great uneasiness.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Mr. Timmins, factor of the Beaver, what do you bring?
As you know, Captain Coffin's brig Beaver, owned by Mr. Roach's kin on Nantucket, is expected with tea upon the instant. I give you my word and my honor that no tea shall be landed while the vessel is under my care, nor touched by any persons until the owner arrives in this town.
Thank you, Mr. Timmins. Is what Captain Hall, Mr. Rowe, and Mr. Timmins offered satisfactory to this body? If so, say aye. Aye. So passed. Mr. Copley, this body now recognizes you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I return as obliged from the castle, having exceeded the time allowed to me. I had hoped that a difficulty of a passage by water to that island shall serve as my apology. I have seen and spoken with the consignees. First and foremost, I am to acquaint with you that they are very desirous of seeing peace restored in town with a tender regard to their families. And they will do everything within their power to give you satisfaction. And although I had convinced them of their safety and attendance of this meeting, and I had used my utmost endeavors to prevail upon them to deliver that satisfaction, it is their collective belief that no answers given to this body will be satisfactory, short of reshipping the teas to London, which is out of their power. They therefore do not think it prudent, nor in their best interests, to appear before you now.
There you have it.
I knew it!
A blatant disregard for the authority of this body.
Yes.
Authority granted in the best of all interests at the very founding of our charter. These tea consignee merchants, they have refused not only this body of the people, but of a legal summons of the town selectmen within a fortnight. Additionally, they did not meet the Sons of Liberty just before them at the request to resign their commission and consignment of the tea.
And do you mean a meeting at the Liberty Tree to face you? To face Mr. Adams, Mr. Molyneux, and Dr. Warren? For public display and mockery, only to then be harassed, intimidated, physically threatened in the days following? You, sirs, you provoked a mob to my father-in-law's place of business, to his very home. You provoked the destruction of his property. It is the conduct of you, gentlemen, and others in this chamber that bring about this preposterous situation. Mr. Williams, I can say that my family has felt the resentment of the people as Mr. Molyneux and Proctor threatened at their very door. It is no question, Mr. Hancock, why the consignees hold to their safety outside of town at Castle Island, out of reach of you, and out of reach of your Sons of Liberty.
Need I remind you, Mr. Copley, that this body already agreed to treat those consignees with civility weeks ago, should they agree to come here and speak with the people. Though they be of different sentiments than this town, their safety from the castle was most certainly guaranteed until the return to that place. And, Mr. Copley, where are they now?
Yes, where are they?
Mr. Copley?
They're cowards.
Cowering! Still behind those 42-pound cannon of the castle!
I am here, Mr. Hancock, and I have offered my services at the expense of my reputation and for the betterment of not only my family and the other consignees, but on behalf of this entire impossible situation. Mr. Clark would make it known in the extreme that they have renewed their offer to store the tea, but they can go no further with the business without countering their ruin, be that financial or otherwise. Furthermore, they offer that while they were not actively involved in introducing the teas to the town, they will not at all interfere with the people in their procedure of the same.
Mr. Moderator, I put it to you and this body of people as to whether Mr. Copley's visit with the consignees and their response has been in the least degree satisfactory to this body.
Very well, sir. Has Mr. Copley's return from the tea consignees at Castle Island and their reply been satisfactory to this body?
Now that we've humbled the consignees, only to find that their true intent was to displease their fellow citizens, we are not obliged to yield to any terms. This is our new resolve. Whereas sundry merchants in the province, basely preferring their own private interests to the general good and contrary to the opinions of New York and Philadelphia and the other colonies that have imported tea from Great Britain, while subject to duty, and whereas they have justly incurred the displeasure of the other colonies by doing so, we resolve that whoever shall import tea from Great Britain into this province, while that accursed and unrighteous Tea Act laying a duty thereon, and we will effect a return of the same to the place from whence it came.
Fellow countrymen, we now have our hands at the plow, and woe be him that shrinks or looks back.
We now call forth Mr. Francis Roach. Mr. Roach, can you please give us a reply as to whether you have made preparations to comply with the resolutions of this body of the people as set forth at our previous meetings?
Since my last appearance here, I have consulted good advisors and am sensible that should I comply, as I have stated before, it would be my ruin. I would most certainly suffer financial loss.
And have you made preparations for your vessel's imminent journey, Mr. Roach?
Mr. Molyneux.
Thank you, Mr. Savage. It is no secret that Mr. Roach's vessel has made no preparations whatsoever to depart these shores. Now, early on in these proceedings, Mr. Roach was quite agreeable to our terms, even going so far as to delay entering the Dartmouth into the customs house. As we all know, all ships have 20 days to unload their cargo, pay the duties, and then set sail once more. This maneuver gave Mr. Roach an extra day. And he has now seemingly wasted this time in all of his back and forth. It has been observed and reported by our watch on Griffin's Wharf that no additional cargo or ballast of any kind has been loaded, no sail or rigging preparations, and no crew provisions. Why, it is as if Mr. Roach is breaking his promise openly to comply with this body and send the tea back to England!
Mr. Roach.
It is true. I have given no notice to Captain Hall to begin preparations to leave this harbor with the tea on board. Yes, I know I gave promise to comply with the requests of this body, but I did so out of fear. Fear, I tell you. And because of such, I did not see myself bound to my promise. I will go as far as any reasonable man should say that he ought for the good of his country, but I cannot see the justice or the patriotism of being put in the front of this battle. I say none of you were ignorant of the impossibility of my getting the tea back, or that I would be ruined in the attempt. This may come as some surprise, that in the event, I am willing to bear my proportion of the loss of the Dartmouth.
Very well.
Very nice. I would therefore submit her for appraisement of any merchants of credit, and I would happily dispose of her under that appraisement. If the mob or the Sons of Liberty or who whatsoever were determined to destroy my vessel, I think it but just that they should bear a part of the loss.
Never!
I will go no further towards reshipping the tea under these circumstances. That being said, and in the contrary, if threatened, I would always hazard my life first.
This body recognizes Mr. Josiah Quincy of Braintree.
Thank you, Mr. Savage. I think it quite fair that Mr. Roach has offered to submit his vessel to the appraisement of merchants and to be a sharer in the loss. And I concur with you, sir. 'Tis cruel that you have been placed at the forefront of this battle. Yes, the people should perhaps share some of the loss of the vessel, as this is a business of public concern. And I would personally give 50 guineas toward purchasing and sending back. I would be the first to say that I hold humanity as a first-rate virtue, and that patriotism without humanity is not true patriotism.
You speak finely, sir, but you don't show your money.
Shame on you! I will have you know that I have received no money or bribes of any sort from Mr. Roach, and whosoever of you has said otherwise is a scoundrel.
I can also attest nothing has transacted between Mr. Quincy and myself. I am as astonished as anyone that no other merchant or other citizens have, until now, shown me the the least bit of affection or generosity to this cause, or offered to share in any loss I might sustain. And so, for that, sir, I thank you.
We are now gathered here on the 16th day of December in the year of our Lord, 1773. Since the 29th of November, we have met to determine the fate of the pernicious East India Company tea that now lies in the docks at Griffin's Wharf. In these meetings, which our royal governor has decreed illegal, we passed numerous resolutions unanimously in the affirmative, preventing the unloading, the receiving, and the vending of the tea. It was then moved and voted that Mr. Roach be directed not to unload the tea on board, and that to do so would be at his peril. Now, although Mr. Roach protested against our proceedings and requests, he has, with some encouragement, ultimately complied.
That is until yesterday.
Mr. Adams, would you care to be recognized and expound on this?
Indeed I would, Mr. Savage. 8 days ago, it was noted with great agitation that Mr. Roach's vessel had not made any preparations whatsoever to send the tea out of our harbor on board this vessel. Therefore, a subcommittee of the Committee of Correspondence was sent to inquire. Doctor?
2 days ago, we ordered Mr. Roach to obtain a pass to exit Boston Harbor from the customs collector, Mr. Harrison. To ensure that Mr. Roach did so, Mr. Adams personally led a delegation of myself and 8 other men to accompany. Mr. Harrison informed us that he would have to consult the customs comptroller, Mr. Hallowell. Well, unfortunately, they informed us that it was impossible for them to grant clearance for the Dartmouth, as it was utterly inconsistent with their duties.
Well, on the advice of the customs officials, Mr. Roach then went to Mr. John Bernard, naval officer, to request a pass for the Dartmouth to sail past the castle, which he too denied on account of the very same failed request from those customs officials. Now, I have it on good authority through the Governor's Council that Colonel Leslie has received orders from Governor Hutchinson to stop the Dartmouth at the castle and prevent any vessel from this town to sail past the fortress without a permit signed by His Excellency. It is no secret that those vessels, the Kingfisher, the Active, have been made ready to respond, as well as Admiral Montague's flagship, the Captain. And need I remind you of the threats, sirs? Captain is a 64-gun ship of the line.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock.
This threat is a reality, gentlemen. I cannot stress the importance of Mr. Roach and his Captain Hall obtaining a pass to safely exit Boston Harbor. After weeks of meetings and discussions, we find ourselves here with but one way that leads to the tea being sent back to London.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Roach, given all that has transpired, will you reconsider the demands of the people before you and have the Dartmouth put a rudder to the town and return the tea from whence it came and end this crisis?
Hear. Mr. Savage, as I have previously stated, sir, that request would be utterly inconsistent with my duty. Not only to my own, but to the reputation of my family and my very name. To send the tea away, as you and this body have determined and demanded of me, would equal my ruin. Shame on you! I therefore restate my position on The Dartmouth has not been granted a pass. Not by the Customs House, not by the naval officer, and with much due respect, Dr. Warren, there is no way left for me!
No. And I implore you, sir, for the betterment of all that is good in this town and these beloved colonies, do not let the fate of unjust taxation and parliamentary control for all Americans rest in that end!
Send the tea away!
Send your ships away!
Of your own design! Send it off our shores! So that it may not be that we see Massachusetts' ruin and the loss of our charter. I will! Fall on you, you can!
Up to Warren!
It is for this reason, then, that you must go to Milton Town and seek a pass from His Excellency Royal Governor Hutchinson. For only he now is the one who can grant a pass and end this crisis.
It is now upon this body to send Mr. Roach to Milton Town to seek a pass from Governor Hutchinson.
I first. I second.
All those in the affirmative say aye. Mr. Roach, it is the will of this body of the people that you travel without delay the 8 miles to Milton Town. There, you will seek a pass from the royal governor. Mr. Roach, you are now directed to take your leave.
The fate of the East India Company tea rests with you.
Thank you for attending this portion of the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. The tea crisis in Boston has only yet begun. As the town meetings continue in Old South Meeting House, please join us downtown at 6 o'clock and witness the word on the street as patriots and loyalists debate the tea. At 7:30 p.m., join the ranks and march with the masses to the waterfront to witness the destruction of the tea at 8 o'clock. For a full schedule and details of tonight's events, please visit BostonTeaParty250.org.